All right, team, good afternoon, everyone. Michelle, Cynthia, let me know when we can go live.
We're ready to start.
Right. All right. Thank you. I'm gonna turn on my video. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I want to start with a simple but an uncomfortable truth. We don't have weather data problem. We have a decision problem. Across Kenya, farmers are receiving forecasts, rainfall probabilities, seasonal outlooks, temperature trends, and yet the most common question remains: what should I actually do? That gap between the information and action is exactly where today's conversation is all about. Today's webinar and session is slightly different from your typical webinar. We're not here for long presentations or theory heavy discussions. We are here to look at real evidence, challenge assumptions, and hear directly from experts working at the intersection of agriculture, climate, and farmer decision making. But before that, I'd like to invite my colleague Ilyas Noure, our climate practice lead, to provide a quick brief about Mexico Agrifin and the Weather Climate Services Project. Ilyas, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Rithika. Hello, everyone. My name is Ilyas Noure. I'm the Digital Climate Smart Ag Director and the Sprout Lead for the Mercy Corps Agrifin program. I'll just take 2 or 3 minutes to just talk you through who we are, what we're doing, and how we go about doing this. So Mercy Corps Agrifin, it's a program within the larger Mercy Corps humanitarian organization. Over the last 10 years, we've managed more than $50 million in innovation funding to help our partners develop, test, scale digitally enabled services that strengthen smallholders' resilience to climate change. We do this by building partnerships across a wide range of stakeholders that include public sector, private sector, financial institutions, mobile network operators, agri-techs, and startups. We also provide catalytic funding for data collection, research, piloting, and evaluating these innovations. And ultimately, we share the learnings and evidence across ecosystem partners and like-minded stakeholders. A little on what we're currently doing. We're implementing a Gates Foundation-funded initiative focused on improving the delivery of weather and climate services through strengthened through strengthened public private sector engagements and partnerships. This initiative basically focuses on facilitating collaboration between the public med agencies, specifically in Kenya, which is the Kenya Meteorology Department, KMD, and Senegal's ANISM, and then the private sector actors who will be leveraging public sector data and their private sector innovations to design, scale, farmer-friendly climate services that farmers can effectively utilize. Through our engagements and learnings, we've seen that collaboration is what really turns forecast into impact, either by aligning climate services with agriculture information, disaster risk management, health, water, livelihood systems, and centering around vulnerable communities that include women, youth, pastoralists, and ensuring that climate information reaches the last mile where it matters the most. As part of this grant, we've established steering committees in each of the respective geographies and markets to share the objectives of this initiative, obtain buy-in from key stakeholders, and share the research and findings we've generated. And as part of that, we'd like to share the results from our Kenya baseline analysis. One, to establish clear evidence on the gaps in the weather climate service ecosystem, to ensure that the program's design and investments are grounded in real system bottlenecks rather than assumptions, and two, to inform the design of effective uh, public-private engagement models and pilot interventions, ultimately to identify opportunities to strengthen collaboration, improve system and service delivery, and ultimately ensure that the climate information is accessible, relevant, and actionable for our smallholder farmers. With that, I'd like to hand the floor back over to Ritika to set the stage for further discussion and introduce the other participants on this webinar. So thank you for joining.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Ilyas. And I realized I never got to introduce myself. Before I hand it over and get into the meat of the matter, I'd like to introduce myself. I think most people here may have come across during my engagements in the past or current engagements. My name is Ritika Sood, and I lead the partnerships for the Sprout platform. I could easily, I believe, can call myself like the founding team member of Sprout, and I'm quite excited about seeing what we are building here. And this would not have been possible without the team or the ecosystem that we have here. So very warmly, I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar. And without further ado, I will shift gears. And yes, thank you, Ilyas. Just to ground this conversation in evidence and without further ado, I think I'd like to invite Beriket right away to walk us through the baseline findings. And as you listen, and this is more for the audience right now, as you listen, I'd encourage you to think about one question. Where exactly are we losing the farmer? Think about that. Use that as like your framework of thought process, and then with that, get into this conversation, this wonderful presentation, and by Barakat, who has joined us and who was our primary research lead. And over to you, Barakat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ritika. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Barakat. I'm a program consultant for the Mercy Corps Griffin. So now on the next section, I'll walk you through on some of the insights from our baseline study in Kenya, specifically basically highlighting what's working, what's not, and what like identifying where or which kind of real opportunities that we have seen. So let me share my screen. Great. So the full uh, baseline report will be circulated right after this. So for this specific presentation, I will be more focusing on the key insights, the patterns that we have seen, and also the pathways that they essentially inform for scaled kind of outcomes. So very quickly diving into some of the contexts. So as you know, Kenya's agriculture is highly climate sensitive, with over 80% of the land being arid or semi-arid, and subsequently, it's not it's more vulnerable to climate shocks, and it's been seen or it's been translating into some of the like production losses, food insecurities that is across counties that I have mentioned earlier, the arid and semi-arid counties. So again, just to highlight, like provision of weather information or weather and climate services is not just an advisory kind of service, but it's becoming more of core resilience kind of infrastructure. And with our program, like Elias briefly mentioned, this weather and climate program, it is designed across addressing this gap that I mentioned earlier. And mainly this is through improving farmer success for climate services so that it can help them better decide or have informed kind of decisions. And this is, again, like he mentioned, a public-private partnership kind of delivery model that we are exploring. So this baseline is what's ground for our pilots. as well as what will become of for the scale up for a more targeted kind of implementation and design. So looking at in terms of the overall scope for the study, we have involved, as you can see here, a wide range of value chain actors and partners. From the demand side, we have engaged with small-scale producers, agro-pastoralists, lead farmers, or what we call intermediaries. And from the supply side, we have also worked with both the public institutions such as KMD, as well as from the private side, around six or seven farmer-facing organizations such as Kwamana, Hello Tractor, Apollo, Agribora, Fresh Crop, and Amtech. And on the right side, as you can see, we have 6 counties that we have focused on. These are basically selected based on the relative vulnerability that they have on different climate change or climate shocks. And we have added, as you can see, from high risk to low risk so that we have the full picture to make our pilots more or less targeted. And we used a hybrid approach with farmer surveys, focus group discussion, and key informant interviews, which pretty much allowed us to just to not just like quantify the patterns, but also understand the big why that's behind them. And looking at our baseline framework, it was structured around 5 key thematic areas or pillars, covering both from the demand side as well as from the supply side. So we have awareness and perception, access and usage, relevance and value add, affordability or willingness to pay, as well as the supply side and the public-private partnership model viability. Okay, so now let's dive into the key findings and insights from our reports. So in terms of farmer profile, around 350 farmers were involved for this survey across the 6 counties, 40% of them being women, and the average age of farmer was around 45 years of age. And as you can see here, the vast majority, around 3/4 of the farmers, they are mixed farmers. And again, from this proportion, 80% of them are crop focused, which again means that their livelihood is highly exposed to the climate variability and the climate shocks that we have touched on earlier. So the other thing is, at the same time, we've seen that these farmers are relatively experienced with around 14 years of experience. That's all about in terms of the overall farmer profile. In terms of the digital readiness, we have seen that about 40% of, 70% of the farmers, they own smartphones. And then again, when we see the education level, it's relatively strong. But then again, one caveat here and one clear gap that we have seen here is that there is clear gender gap in both device ownership and education level. Okay. So in general, what we have seen is while the digital delivery is viable, it is not inherently inclusive. So it has to be also incorporated in our pilot design and implementation as well. Great. So now deep diving into the 5 pillars that we have earlier touched on. Let's unpack some of the key findings pillar by pillar. So the first one is awareness and reach. Awareness and reach is the first segment. So we see actually, as you see in these numbers, kind of a universal awareness about what weather information or what weather and climate service is actually. But again, almost 80% of them, they receive the weather information in the past 3 years. And out of this, 90% of them have received it in the past 6 months. So what this tells us is actually outreach is there and it's still it's working. But then again, what about trust and source dynamics, right? So with that, trust we see is a bit moderate, but then again fragile, because only quarter of the farmers they fully trust it. The other they don't trust it, or they trust it with some kind of caveat. And comparing trust by source, we see that farmers that are using private sources or channels, such as like farmer-facing organizations, they show kind of higher trust in the information that they receive compared to the public channels. And uh, in terms of the other farmer perception insight that we have seen, even though around 23% of them they misunderstood the forecast, but then again 80% of them still consider them very useful. So it's interesting inside because farmers are still extracting value even though the understanding is imperfect. And what this tells us is actually that there is a significant kind of untapped upside if the clarity kind of layer is improved. And moving on, when we compare across counties, we see pretty much different maturity level in terms of understanding, as you can see here. Nakuru and Nandra show high trust and adoption. This is mainly driven by a strong farmer-facing organizations presence. Narok, as you can see, had lower trust, which is again linked to some accuracy issues and microclimate kind of mismatches. Uh, so yeah, so this slide actually really brings it together. So there are five key drivers that stand out when we talk about awareness and perception. So one is consistent exposure, localization, clear communication, and also channel accessibility, as well as accuracy at a micro level, which we can't think of trust and behavior change without this above five drivers. So this is kind of a summary of the access and perception thematic area. Now moving into access and usage, this is where the core gap becomes very clear. And as you see here, seasonal forecasts, weather updates are the main kind of type of weather information that currently our farmers currently receive. And half of these farmers experience inconsistency or that's highly correlated to in terms of accuracy. For example, in narrow focus group discussion with farmers, one point that kept being raised again and again was that forecasts, for example, it comes as some of them, it's sunny and then later in the day it rains. So again, which is mainly due to the microclimate differences that Narok has, as it is close to a forest, but it also speaks a lot about the localization that it's been still being missed. And moving on, uh, what particularly interesting thing here that we have seen is the mismatch between the supply and the actual demand. So as you see here, more than 51% to be exact, 51% of the farmers, they receive weather forecasts or weather information monthly or less. While again, when we compare it to what they actually want, it's around 70% is the demand to be receiving weekly or bi-weekly at most. But currently, most of it is monthly on monthly or more basis. And again, similarly, over 70% of them indicated they want weather information all year round, not just on a dry season or not just on short rainy seasons. So this is a clear signal for us that uh, we are underserving our farmers because the demand is unmet, but still inconsistency and cadence still some things that we need to consider. And when we look at how farmers are currently accessing information or the actual channels, the system, as you can see here, is still dominated by SMS and also mass channels such as radio and TV. And one interesting thing actually that we've seen here is that radio is relatively more leveraged by women and the elderly. And this was due to digital access and literally the literacy gap that there is. So these mass channels such as radio and TV again are effective for scale, but then again they are seen as generic and not localized across the different farmer groups that we have surveyed. Moving on, again, despite all these constraints, usage behavior is actually, we've seen it to be very strong. So over 90% of the farmers report acting on the weather information they actually receive, and they use it for different decision making. So it could be most of them is for planting decisions, land preparation, and also input application. So actually what this shows is that farmers are not just passive receivers or recipients, they actually act on it or try to actively integrate what they receive into decision making. And to add more color to the above findings, we tasted two very critical or crucial things. So the first thing we tasted was forecast literacy. And we found, or we asked our farmers, imagine the weather forecast says there is 75 or 70% chance of rain tomorrow. What does it mean to you, right? And interestingly, we found that 1 in 5 farmers still misinterpret or cannot interpret probability-based messages. And secondly, the second point we tasted was farmers' interpretive application of advisories, not just weather forecasts, but advisories. How do they apply it actually? And interestingly, again, we found that a third of the farmers prefer to cross-check with past experience before actually applying this weather advisories, which tells us and which is highly linked to past accuracy issues that they have faced. Moving on, just to summarize, farmers' three main pain points in terms of access is reliability concerns, timeliness, not getting is on time, and also frequency. And the third one is limited localization. So these three, reliability, which is highly correlated to the accuracy, the timeliness, and limited localization are the three key access barriers for weather information that we have seen with our farmers. Yeah, and also one important nuance here is that access is not equal. As I've mentioned earlier, women are significantly more likely to like rely on radio, shared devices, or secondhand kind of information that is cascaded down from a household member. Like generally, what this translates to is that even when the access exists, it's not often like direct, and since it's translated down or cascaded by household member, it might get the message can get diluted in the process. So if we take like a step back from this on the access and usage, the key takeaway that we've found is that access is not just a yes or a no question, but it's all about three things. So there's the frequency, is it timely also, there's the directness component, does it reach the farmer directly or personally, and also there's the relevance component of it, is it localized, is it actionable. These are the three things that we need to consider when we talk about access. And the next section actually deep dives into relevance and value. So this is actually where the whole story that we talked earlier becomes more compelling. So as you can see here, more than around 60% of the farmers don't receive weather information on time or timely, which again supports some of the findings that I mentioned earlier. And what's particularly interesting is that more than 80 or more than 90% actually of the farmers say that the weather information they receive is useful. And this is despite the accuracy and the delivery timeliness issues. So when we see why this is like being recorded or what are the main causes, this was attributed to that farmers are actually seeing tangible improvement on their farm level. So, for example, it could be in terms of improved yields, which accounts to improved income, reduced crop losses, better input usage. So again, this is critical for us because it shows that the weather information is already delivering economic value at the farm level, and the farmers actually know about it and they're embracing it. So we're not just tasting a hypothesis for the farmers here. Rather, we're scaling something that actually works and that farmers actually believe in. Moving into the fourth pillar thematic area, we see that it's affordability and willingness to pay. So because this is often uh, like where the assumptions diverge from the reality, because when you talk about willingness to pay and affordability, like at the first glance, it may seem like farmers are not willing to pay for any weather-related kind of services. But our baseline data actually tells a different story, a more nuanced kind of story. Let's take a deep dive into it. So generally, currently, what we have seen is more than 90%, or to be specific, 95% of the farmers, they don't actually pay like directly for any kind of weather information services or when any kind of weather advisory services. So on the surface, uh, and also like taking, double click on this, only 30% of the farmers say that they will be willing to pay for any weather related information. And this is because most of the farmers, they take weather information as a public good and not something to pay for. Uh, but yeah, but uh, if we stop here, the conclusion would be like, is this like commercially viable, or there will be like limited kind of commercial viability, right? So, but that would be a wrong conclusion because what we have interestingly found out is that when we asked farmers if they would pay if some conditions are met, for example, if it's accurate, if it's timely, if it's bundled, will you be willing to pay? And the willingness to pay significantly increased from 30 to 52%, almost doubling. So this is an important insight for us as we design our pilot and also the scale up projects as well. And we again asked what would be like the average range or amount that farmers will be comfortable in paying. And we found a range which is 30 to 70 shillings per month, or half shilling per SMS. So this is one of the interesting insight that we have found. And yeah, so this willingness to pay is again a very, very critical insight for us because as you know, and as we have rightly seen in the past, most of the pilot projects that we've seen, they are donor funded, and the projects stop as soon as the funding stops. So if we are talking about sustainability, this willingness to pay component is a very, very crucial component that we can't avoid. So moving on, again, just stepping back, the key takeaway here is that affordability is not a primary barrier for willingness to pay. It's rather a value for many kind of question that we are asking. Great. So the final pillar that we have here is the supply side. And this is again very important because this is also where the root of the system constraint really sits in. Um, and what we see here uh, is not actually a lack of capability, but it's more a lack of coordination and a lack of platform for structured kind of basically collaboration. So starting with the public side, KMD, uh, as you know, it plays a very, very critical role in terms of being a source for authoritative kind of weather data. And this is actually, they have also good technical expertise and credibility. But that said, we have identified or pinpointed three key pain points that they face. One is limited resource and staffing, which is again very critical in terms of both at the production level actually, as well as when they cascade it down at a county or at a ward level. The second key challenge that we've seen is in terms of localizing forecast at a micro level. For example, as I've mentioned earlier, some of the forecasts are at county level, not down to a ward level. The third one is limited capacity for last mile dissemination. And on the other hand, when you see the private side, the farmer-facing organizations, they play or they bring an opposite kind of strengths. So they have strong last mile reach. They have direct relationship or communication with the farmer, more closer than the public side. And also they have the ability to unpack or localize or what is it like translate the weather information even more. Um, but yeah, but again, there are some issues similarly that we have seen in the private side. They depend heavily on the quality of data that they get from the public side or whichever their sources in terms of the produced weather data. So what we see is both public side and the private side, they are strong, but in different part of the value chain, right? Uh, yeah, let's move to the next one. Again, so looking into how ready or how the supply side is ready for private, public-private partnership, um, as they may be like missing coordination layer because it's a more fragmented layer. We've seen that both of their strengths is more or less complementary to each other, and the public-private partnerships is the way to go if we are talking about fixing this fragmented system. So the model that emerged from this baseline is clear, like the public sector or the KMD for us for the Kenyan context, it anchors the credibility and the data integrity, whereas the private, they handle more of the packaging and the delivery and also the localization. Um, so yeah, so this makes also a full circle in terms of aligning the incentives across actors. So the public, they achieve broader reach, which they currently uh, uh, are more interested in. The privates, they build their viable service models, and the farmers, they receive more nuanced, more relevant, more usable weather information. Yeah, and by the way, we didn't just look at these findings in isolations. What we did is we compared all our findings with benchmarks from national level, as well as across the region. We touched on different similar market such as Kenya, such as Tanzania, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Ghana, South Africa, and Mali. And this pretty much actually helped us in terms of sense checking what we are really seeing locally, like what's unique to Kenya, what can be expanded, what's consistent across the different markets. These are the things that this um, benchmarking really helped us in terms of designing our interventions and also our delivery models. Great. So the last segment or the last section for this presentation actually is this segmentation of farmer profiles or persona. So what we did is rather than just like doing all fits all kind of model, what we did is we took step further to develop a distinct kind of farmer profiles because what became very much clear to us is like all farmers are not like engaging weather information the same way. So kind of a nuanced kind of approach in terms of how we design the delivery is pretty much important. So instead of treating farmers as one group, we identified, as you can see here, four pretty much clear personas based on our baseline data. This is across access, level of access, level of comprehension, level of usage. So we have around four personas or segments. We have early adopters, conditional adopters, guided adopters, and also heritage farmers or the conventional kind of farmers. And for each profiles, we have outlined the targeted kind of engagement strategies alongside the kind of opportunities that we see to pretty much inform our tailored kind of delivery models, as I have mentioned. Uh, so we believe these profiles and strategies can be applied more broadly across similar programs, even in Kenya as well as even other markets. So we'll be sharing. Actually, I've seen in the comment in the chat section that asking about sharing this report. So at the end, we'll be sharing this report. But just to conclude, what this baseline clearly showed us is that farmers are ready and they see value in the weather information or weather and climate service that they receive. So what's missing is not the demand, but rather a system that delivers consistently and also with accuracy. So that's all for this segment of the discussion. Over to you, Ritika.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Barakat. That was incredibly insightful for me, and I'm sure for a lot of the audiences out there too. And some of the questions on the chat that are coming in, I was browsing through through the chat as well. I believe Barakat has already touched on a few of them. Example being the question around paying capacity of the farmers and the ecosystem, and a couple of others which we'll get to in the expert commentary section. But to be honest, while this is incredibly insightful for us, Barakat, it is also slightly concerning. Because what we're seeing is not a lack of effort. It's what we're seeing essentially is it's a system that isn't fully translating information into action. And this primarily has been the theme of a lot of questions that are coming in as well. And I'm finding that quite intriguing, to be sincerely honest with everybody here. So, for example, one of the questions that came in was like on the farmer's trust, like how the measurement of this trust happens, who to trust and how to trust. The other question was around like how are the farmers reacting to this information. And one of the other, the three or four that I browsed through, one other question that I saw was around like how essentially is this information and the actionable information as well is actually getting converted or transmit or inferring into an actual action that should be taken. So I'm quite intrigued to actually perhaps segue this into the expert section and ask the kind of questions that our expert here would be able to answer. With that, what I'd like to do now is bring in our experts, not exactly for long speeches, but for a quick, honest reaction to what we've just heard. And I believe the question around trust and interpretation that I was alluding to a little while ago is quite interesting and quite dear to me, to be honest. So I think I'll start with Paul, who's joining us from KMD. And Paul, my first question to you would be, um, we've seen from the data that farmers receive forecasts but struggle to interpret or act on them, right? From your perspective, is this a communication issue or is it a limitation of how the forecasts are currently structured? Paul, over to you.
Yes, Ritika, can you hear me well, please?
Sorry, say that again.
Confirm you can hear me well.
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you, Barakat, for the good presentation. But one of the few things allow me to point out that the baseline by the Massive Agri project is coming being very handy. Owing to the fact that we are aware as Kenya Meteorological Department, and we talk about it, that several baseline studies have been done on usability of climate and weather information, but most of them are not shared. So first of all, allow me on behalf of the Director General of Kenya Met to say that You informed Kenya Meteorological Department, but we could not ourselves do the baseline ourselves. And we also want to thank you for including and also interviewing our county directors. Coming to that, the question I've talked about. Tomorrow, that is on 27th of March 2026, Kenya Meteorological Department will transit to the Kenya Meteorological Services Authority. And allow me to say why we are looking at that one so that I can test the issues of trust. One of the few things is that over the decades, we have seen that there are so many players in the meteorological space. That is the climate information space. And that's why the Kenyan government thought that it will be very much better to regulate the space. One, from data collection. Our main thing today is from forecast to decision. But as a meteorological service, we are looking at even further from data collection because the forecast that we generated, they came out very well even from your opening remarks, is that the data, the forecast that we are having a challenge of the weather station, the infrastructure. So Met Department, we have gone back to that. To address that issue, we have done so that I come on issues of trust. We are aware that we have numerous sources of meteorological forecast, light from the indigenous weather techniques, which are very critical in our land. Then we have even apps that we are looking at. So now what we are looking at is now trying to regulate even if the data measurement is the forecast that we are using. So one of the few things that I would like to talk about, and I would like to salute and also appreciate the support we are getting, that now we have the Kenya Meteorological Services Authority and the Meteorological Training and Research Directorate. Our research here at the Institute for Meteorological Training and Research shows that there is a gap along the whole value chain of the climate information space. We are slightly talking about farmers, but farmers is just one because they get support all the way from the agro input data, the extension services. So the trust, if I were to cite my Director General, Edward Morioki, 2 weeks ago, and even during the World Meteorological Organization on Monday, is up at 95%, at 95%. What has happened to it is that the feedback we have gotten that we have improved our skills, including for human resource, and also at the moment we are also adopting artificial intelligence. We have moved from a forecast to impact-based forecasting, not what weather will be, but what weather can do. For example, we have really seen an increase in demand for weekly forecast because farmers are getting seasonal forecast. But the weekly forecast is what informs the action for the next 7 days. We have also had a demand for people are saying the citizens they require the forecast. We usually release it on Monday. But they ask, can we release the forecast on Sunday for planning purposes? Why is the weekly forecast very important? And that's what now increases the trust. The forecast is always coupled with what will be happening in the morning and in the afternoon. And if you have, for example, 3 consecutive dry days, this can inform the farmer, this is the time for top dressing. This is the time that I can do spraying. If I am a livestock farmer, this is the time I can harvest my silage. So what we do, aware that the Kenya Meteorological Department cannot go to the mandates of the Ministry of Agriculture, we devised a mechanism of participatory scenario planning, so that the meteorological department will give you the expected weather conditions. And I like the way Balakat talked about because I was also writing the notes. We have moved from a probabilistic forecast to give you the range of rainfall you expect in your particular locality, up to 4 by 4 kilometer grid, because we realize some wards in Kenya are very expensive. So our forecast these days, we are not telling you it will be above normal. We are giving you a range, maybe 400 to 450 millimeters. After that, we take it to the crops officer, who are devised on the variety and the type to be adopted for that particular, and even the technology. Because of the time is that after the forecast is released for the national forecast, we downscale and they customize the forecast to all the 47 counties. Then we do value addition. There is a challenge in Kenya and all those countries along the equator because of the falling terrain. And then after we develop this forecast, we do co-production, and then we do co-delivery together because that is what the new essence is co-delivery of the service. So the
Paul?
issue of SMS, yes?
Hi, Paul. I'm so sorry I'm interjecting here. May I please request you to wrap this up? We have so many other
Yeah.
questions from the audience to answer as well. I'm so sorry to
Thank you.
interject.
No, thank you very much. We are aware that there are so many, there are social platforms, there are WhatsApp group, there are SMS, like what we are the initiated by the Sprout, and then there are emails. So we have looked even at how do we reach the last more skilled farmer who cannot even understand those technicalities. So we have all those ones, but we are very much appreciative that we can be able now to package and improve our business. Thank you very much, Ritika.
Amazing, Paul. No, this is so intriguing and helpful for us to understand and how KMD is coming in and what the role of KMD is in this entire ecosystem as we speak for, right? You play a very, very critical role. The ecosystem, I would say, largely also depends on a lot of intelligence that comes from KMD. And we are quite excited to see that KMD now wants to participate a lot more in the PPP place and be collaborative with the rest of the ecosystem in actually taking this information to action. And I believe that is the theme of our conversation as we speak right now. So, Paul, thank you so much for this information and sharing such incredible insights. Great, thank you so much. With that, I think it's nice for me to move to Dr. Todd. Dr. Todd, may I please bring you in here? I think KMD has, of course, a great role to play within the ecosystem, but also very strongly believe that an ILRI or a CGIAR system with, you are a multi-stakeholder institution in a large organization, research institution to say the least. And you've done the institution, of course, has done years and years of deep research on climate, on different value chains. So from a systems perspective, do you think that are we overestimating the power of information alone to change the farmer's behavior? Or do you think that there's a missing layer in between the insight and the action bit?
Okay, thanks, Ritika. And also Paul for his comments and for this really interesting presentation. I have two layers, I think, to this answer. And I entered first a question in the comments about how long people have been receiving these. Because when we're talking about trust, this is a really important factor. Because I think we can't expect to start firing off our climate information advisories and expect this to transform people's agricultural practice overnight. Building trust takes time, especially with this kind of information input. It's not always immediately apparent how this is useful, but I think our own work within the CGIR and at ILRI, and I think a lot of work in other contexts has found that people are interested. They do want to capture the value of climate information. It's not always immediately apparent. So it takes some time, it takes some experimenting, it takes some playing around with, okay, so they've said that this year and I'll watch first to evaluate whether it's true. And one forecast that says it'll be dry and it rains, that can set back trust for a long time. Farmers, especially smallholder farmers, are famously conservative in terms of changing what they do, and for good reason. I think we need to respect that. So I don't see a major deficiency in what is being done, but we are, from a programmatic point of view, so invested in showing impact in a project cycle. And building trust over an abstract information advisory such as these takes time. And this isn't just smallholders either. This is all over the place. It takes time to get used to that. So I think we need to respect farmers' conservatism while also acknowledging, as was well pointed out, that people do want this. They do see value in it, and some are experiencing value in it, and that's part of the process. I think we can always look at our own practice and see where we can do more. Complementary services for interpreting and imagining the various ways that those can apply are crucial. I like that Bereket pointed out the importance of radio, especially for women accessing this, because people do, and this is very consistent with what we have experienced in the in the ICOR project within Kenya in the last 5 years. So building up complementary services, the downscaling processes, the private sector and public sector extension, and bidding them in on the process about how these might be applied is going to be hugely important. I think one other factor that needs to be considered, and I am conscious of time, I'm not going to go on forever, Ritika, that as a risk management tool, climate advisories have promise. But we have to, again, acknowledge that farmers, smallholder farmers, and any other kind of farmers, they already have a risk management portfolio that they use. They have certain obligations, they have relationships, they have a lot of objectives they're trying to achieve in their agriculture. Climate Information Services comes in as one stream, one new and unfamiliar stream that takes time to adjust to. But it also, we have to, I think, temper our expectations to, again, acknowledge that this is one information stream which is coming into interaction in a very complex decision-making environment with a lot of different factors and priorities. So I think, need to work with farmers and acknowledge their own agency in how to interpret what to do with this and how to weigh it against other factors for managing risk and accomplishing their variety of goals that they have as farmers. And I'll stop there.
Brilliant, Todd. Thank you so much for making my job a little simpler.
Gladly done.
Thank you. Just going back to what you were mentioning, I really like that you mentioned that climate information services is a new field, and you're absolutely right about this. There is no, I would say, benchmark in the market out there. It's such a new field that I believe all of us are learning on the job in figuring out what works, what doesn't work in the ecosystem. And it's also interesting to see how climate information services and the delivery of that and the adoption and the reception of all this information is so different and segregated when we look at different agroecological geographical areas as well. And that's quite, and that I believe like definitely makes our lives a lot more difficult and complex in making sure that the farmers receive the information that they need to receive and be able to take the action, right? Um, I also like how you touched on the trust aspect of things and its importance in earning it from the farmers, and how perhaps bundling the service is one pathway forward. I honestly don't think that we'll be able to answer this big question that we have right now in front of us in this, like I would say, the next couple of minutes. But I think this definitely involves a deep sense of responsibility, and the conversation is there. And if the conversation and the debate is happening in the right direction, I'm 110% positive and optimistic about how we as an ecosystem in collaboration with each other would be able to find those solutions, right? Um, um, and yeah, I think that takes me to one more point around gender access. And I liked Bereket when Bereket, you mentioned about how women are at a certain disadvantage, or women farmers rather are at a certain disadvantage to receiving this kind of information, and their access is not as is that par with the male farmers, right? So we have here our expert Rhoda, who essentially works with Mercy Coragriffin, and she is our gender expert. Rhoda, my question, I would love to bring you in and ask you a question. Um, where exactly are women being excluded? Is it like an access to information issue, Or is it an issue of interpretation, or do you think that actual decision-making power is not there with women? Of course, I have my own sweet opinions around it, but I'd rather air it to the expert to talk about this. Over to you, Rhoda.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ritika. Just checking everyone can hear me. Perfect. It's great to meet you all, and thank you so much for all the insights that have been shared in this discussion, this very, very, very important discussion. Um, it's the issue around gender and the gender lens when it comes to uh, access, awareness, access, uptake, adoption, um, uh, has multiple dimensions to it. Because when you're thinking about anything, for example, with a gendered lens, it means that you have to be looking at this from the holistic, the lived experience. So when we're looking at the different characteristics, the social demographic characteristics, so for instance, gender, whether it's women, whether it's men, whether it's youth, um, paired with other factors such as, and which were discussed by Barakat as well in the presentation, around education level, access to mobile devices, and what women are actually using their devices for. So we have data and evidence, and I'm going to make that distinction because data gives you the numbers. Evidence demonstrates why and in what context that that scenario actually exists. So when we're talking about smartphone usage, for instance, are we asking ourselves and going further to ask ourselves in what context what are they using their devices for? Women are more likely because of their both productive and reproductive roles. So, household, education for children, managing health, and so forth. Are more likely to default to utilizing smartphones if they do have that, especially within shocks, whether it's climate shocks, whether it's health shocks, which are of course interlinked as well. When we think about food insecurity and so forth, loss of education for children and consistency within that, they're more likely to default to utilizing their smartphones if they do have that for those priorities. So again, it actually speaks to what Todd was mentioning about it's also understanding what the priorities are and how do we meet then women, especially low-income women farmers, where they are in that specific case and point, whether it's about the geography, whether it's about other factors, which are either impacting their ability to be resilient or enabling them. Now, there was something that was pointed out as well in this discussion around bundled products and services. So, research as well has evidenced that bundling services whereby we're looking at the connections between climate information. We're looking at the other services which are important and priorities, such as access to health services, access to other products and services which are very, very, very they're needs based, so to speak. So the willingness to pay, for instance, and in the long term, is very much directed by need. And thinking about, as I mentioned, the fact that women's roles tend to be productive and reproductive, how quickly and how efficiently can you get a bundled service to them, which they can access, whether it's online, whether it's when we think about social cultural norms, for instance, examples is in ASAL regions, is it a hybrid model? And this is where we're seeing a lot of benefits coming from having a hybrid model of digital platforms and also in-person and physical platforms. We've seen the issue around trust really focusing on what is happening at a community level, whereby women will be interested in accessing service information on climate, not by what private sector might be bringing to the ground with their agents and so forth, but from, in fact, county government officers, agricultural officers. However, the challenge there, and we've understood this based on our programs, for instance, with Acre Africa in Mokweni, that there's now, because of lack of funding, only one agency officer, government agency officer in one county for at least 50 farms. And so the delivery and who is delivering and how they're doing that in terms of trust is also very important and also very gendered. I'll give you a note verbatim, for instance, whereby some female farmers said that we would rather get that information from the agent, from the government county officer, rather than getting that information from the private sector, agent operators and so forth on the ground, because social cultural norms, tradition, because they played a very big role and have done for generations, for decades. And so the adoption of new behaviors and patterns is something that we need to be very cognizant of, but then also not eroding what has already worked before, and seeing how we can make that a more seamless and accessible mode of service. It's not about sometimes rethinking how to go about this, especially when it's gendered, because there are learnings that we can take. It's about the investment, as you said as well, the accountability as well, and the partnerships which can strengthen practices which have already taken place, which have been ongoing, but are very underfunded and very underserved. So from a gender perspective, I would say those are some of the issues that we need to consider. We need to consider social cultural norms and where we meet them, where we meet female farmers, where we meet youth farmers as well. Is it chama groups for older women and barazas and so forth in ASAL, including radio and so forth, where the adoption of and the uptake of information that's their go-to. How are we looking at digital infrastructure if we're moving this information to be only digital, if that's choice, digital literacy, and who is then conducting the training and support to be able to do that? So without having a holistic approach into how all these factors are combined, speak to their need and want and aspirations. Because the one thing we never ask when we're in the field, what do you want? We make assumptions about what we think they want. But if without even asking those questions, it just means that we are going to be very slow in being able to actually make the change that is necessary for resilience and stability. Thank you.
Amazing. Perfect, Rhoda. This was very well timed. I'm quite impressed as well. Thank you so much. Well, I was actually going to ask you another question, that, what truly inclusive climate services could look like in your practice and in practice, I'm sorry, and in your humble opinion, and not just in theory. But I think your conversation and the discussion and your points forward essentially captured a lot of that information, which I'd like to summarize in one sentence. I personally really liked how you mentioned about how access and adoption is so deeply dependent on socioeconomic norms, right? And this is not something that's quite new to us or any of us sitting here. It's just that sometimes we forget the intentionality behind how we are designing programs, how we're going about providing services, and so on and so forth. So I'm quite excited, and thanks for that reinforcement. I very strongly believe in that you have touched on what are some of those different features and different areas where perhaps women lack the access to information, and how some of the women are not some, well, largely women, smallholder farmers, are at a certain disadvantage. And that's exactly why we have been able to conduct this baseline survey and this research. Berekit, I think, has been spectacular in putting forward all of the points, and it's quite scientific. I mean, I've seen this report at least 10 times, and every time I see it, I learn something new, and it's quite exciting to see that. Um, Now, I believe, I can go on and on. This is a favorite topic of mine as well, as a fellow woman. But I can go on about this. So, with that, and given the fact that we have very limited time here, I would, honestly would like to bring in Matthews from Agribora, which is a private sector. It's a company. It's a private sector company, and I'd like to ask him a couple of questions, and I'd also like to ask similar kind of questions to Susan, who's joining us from Hello Tractor as well. So it's quite intriguing, honestly, to see how, what advice do farmers actually follow? Now that we've heard KMD, we've heard an institutional and I would say a CG perspective. We've also heard a gender experts perspective. I really want to understand that you, as Agribora or Hello Tractor, as private companies, you and your team is the closest to the farmers. You interact with them on an everyday basis. I'd like to understand from, or rather, I would say we would like to understand from your perspective, like what advice do farmers actually follow? Matthews, this is directed to you.
Okay, thank you, Ritika. I hope I'm clear enough. And I
Yes.
really appreciate the feedback from the speakers who have talked before me. I'm really happy about the contribution of Mr. Paul Murage and Mr. Todd, especially when talking about trust issues. I think generally farmers, in as much as they also make use of the traditional methods to look at the weather conditions, there are also specific sources of weather information that they trust or do not trust. So, for example, when you tell them about the Kenya Met Department, they tend to listen more because that is a body that provides verified weather information. So trust is very key. And also Bereket talked about consistency when looking at access barriers. So today you are sending, I think Paul also talked about it. Today you're sending a message about rains, providing some sort of millimeters, and then there are no rains. And then the next week you say that there are rains, then there are no rains. So essentially the trust is eroded over time, and the confidence that the farmers have with that particular service provider also wanes with time. So farmers, essentially, based on our experience working with farmers at Agribora, is that they tend to follow sources which provide consistent and trustworthy information. Once those two are lacking in your communication, then they tend to move away. I'd also like to share our experience working with farmers from Bomet County in Central Rift. There's a time we were visiting some farmers during harvesting of Irish potato, and one of the farmers who is who is a person living with disability, uh, showed us that he was actually relying on the weather messages which we were sending to them. And this actually made it possible for him to postpone the harvesting, which had been planned a day after our visit. So generally, Ritika, when there is consistency in how the information is being communicated, and one fact that we have to believe in is that the weather messages may not be 100%. I think that is something that we believe in. But at least if there is some sort of consistency in how this communication is done, then you build trust over time. And then farmers also tend to believe in everything that you are saying. So for me, and also for what we believe in Agribora, is that we have to be close to the farmers, especially when they receive the messages. And then while working with them as even extension support officers, we need to help the farmers answer the question, which is what next? I think, Ritika, most of the time the messages are sent, but they don't answer the what next question. And when you're looking at what Bereket was talking about, an aspect of cost also creeps in. You want to send a message which is 160 characters in length, and you are looking at maybe 100,000 farmers. The cost is very high. So you are thinking, should I limit it to 160 characters, or I can go beyond 160 characters? Anytime it goes to 2 pages, then an extra cost comes in. So at times, uh, we are not able to, and I believe other speakers may also believe in what I'm saying, is that sometimes you're not able to communicate fully to the farmer because of the inherent costs involved in sending a message to even one farmer. So if you have 100 farmers and the message is maybe 2 pages long, then you may be limited in how you communicate this to the farmers. And lastly, the problem of interpretation. I think Mr. Paul Morage talked about it. There are times when you receive a message, but you don't know how to interpret it, and because of the extension, the fact that the extension officers are not really available at the ward level except on demand, it means you may receive your message and you may not even know how to consume that particular message. So farmers definitely will follow organizations or even messages which provide accuracy, consistency, and then over time they can build trust with these organizations and even the messages. Back to Ritika.
Thank you so much for this answer, Matthews. It's quite nuanced, and that's more than half the reason why we wanted you and Susan to be part of this conversation, is because we really want to hear from the ground. Like I mean, you are our eyes and ears on the ground in terms of what is happening amongst the smallholder farmers, what are the themes that are emerging, and likewise, right? And I really like the fact that you alluded to several points here. You spoke about the choice of channel. You spoke about the kind of content that is being pushed out to the farmers. The way we as the ecosystem, we're designing the content, and eventually how it is getting interpreted as well is something that's quite critical in our larger, I would say, scheme of things and pieces of delivering this information out there. So, Susan, I mean, while largely Matthews answered what builds the trust and what kind of information farmers find useful, could you speak about what is it that farmers do not find useful? So, like, I would say the do's and the do nots in that approach. So, Susan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ritika. And yeah, this has been a lovely conversation that I've been enjoying. So I love what Matthew said. He actually captured a lot of, what farmers act towards. What farmers may not find useful, based on our experience, first of all, is we have seen that when you introduce a whole new behavior change without providing like proper infrastructure, or making them have to rely on external actors, then becomes very difficult for them. Because let's say, for example, we deal with mechanization, and we try to connect tractor owners with farmers across our emerging markets. And so if we want to preserve conservation agriculture, for example, to use a reaper as opposed to a plow, and to hold on moisture, or maybe the rainy season is coming up and we want them to use timely mechanization service. If you promote a new tractor implement in a message in terms of digital advisory, but then there is no availability of this tractor or the special implement or conservation agricultural mechanization, then farmers tend to ignore anything without an enabling infrastructure. I think precision matter more than volume. So if you overload farmers' phones with messages, then sometimes it means that they start to have too much breadth and width, and sometimes that precision lacks, and therefore the rate of ignorance is increasing. Then we have found that when messages are, like general insights as opposed to action-oriented messages, also those tend to get really ignored. For example, if you say something like, plant on time to avoid lost in yield, stuff like that. So some of those messages are ignored because they're like noise to farmers. We don't want to compete with the experience of farmers, their intuition, their peer behavior. And therefore, what we have learned over the years of operation is that proximity and consistency really matters. And that's why we try to build our own, mechanization hubs to offer mechanization as well as other wraparound services, because our farmers need much more than that. They need weather information, they need good input and seed storage, post-harvest solutions. So we don't want to be the experts in terms of advice that competes with their own experience, with the years of farming. And so because of that, we really listen to them. We have our community-based agents on the ground that can help us to confirm what our farmers are already leaning towards. We want to embed our digital advisory on existing operational behavior of farmers to see how can we create more relative advantage as opposed to like an absolute improvement in a very short window. So it has to do with a lot of proximity and consistency and really speaking their language, and not language as just language, but also the contextual awareness, their colloquial expressions, how they communicate as a community, the flow of that language and the expressions that they use. So I think all of that fits into what they really like and how we try to avoid ignorance or casual dependency on digital advisory. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Susan. I think you touched on a very, very important point. You mentioned that general messages are vague, not as much using the same language, but you did allude to that they are vague. And we as uh, the ecosystem or organizations that work with these smallholder farmers must avoid that, right? And I believe this gets us to the next point as to like why more actionable suggestions and advisory is the key to not only building trust, but also inspiring action and therefore the impact that all of us envision right now amongst the smallholder farmers, right? So, well, I'd like to thank both you, Susan, and Matthews, to bring in this perspective and share your insights from the ground. I'm also seeing some really interesting conversations that are happening in the chat, and I'd like to acknowledge Lynette from Apollo Agriculture, who's been talking a lot about the experience that she has had working with the smallholder farmers as part of Apollo Agriculture. So quite exciting to see this quite enriching conversation. Um, I want to be mindful of time, so I am going to go and dive right in and bring in Dr. Pamela, again from KMD. And last but not least, Dr. Pamela, over to you. And my question to you is not a simple one. And I very strongly think that this is a little bit tougher than my other questions to other people. Do you think that can we realistically move towards localized and actionable advisories at scale? Or, and if yes, how? Could you please answer that for us? I'm sure all of us are waiting to hear that from you.
Well, a good afternoon, participants. And thank you, Ritika, for coordinating us in this. I hope I'm being heard clearly by every one of us. Great. I want to say that climate information or weather information for decision making as we move from forecasts to decisions, as my colleague Morage mentioned, that now we are looking at the aspects of impacts. What does the climate information we give, how does it affect the decisions that the farmers are making? And from the presentation on the study findings, we find that the need for climate information cuts across gender. And we, as Kenya Met Service, we have an approach that really we are sure that we can move to scale. We can be able to meet the needs of the various users of our forecast. And how are we approaching this? Ensuring that there is co-production. How do we achieve production? Our services are decentralized to say that we have county directors of meteorology in all the 47 counties. When we give our forecasts, the seasonal forecasts, the county directors of meteorology move to their counties to be able to downscale the forecasts to the specific needs of the county. because we know each of the counties has different practices around agriculture. Different gender are involved in different ways in agriculture practices. And co-production is very critical because we bring in all stakeholders, including women, including the experts in every of the sectors, so that then they bring the farmers bring in the need. What is it they want to get from the med service? What does this focus mean to them in their various livelihoods? Therefore, we are scaling it up to the levels of all the people that need the climate information to shape their decisions. Also using multiple channels. We have moved, you remember those days, it was basically like the KBC alone that was giving the weather products. But today we have moved to all channels, social media. We have our county directors have various platforms where farmers across gender, across the value chains are involved, and they get the forecast as needed. They get the products that are given that are specific to their various counties to address the practices of those specific farmers. And besides using the various channels, we are reaching out to these people so that even the women in their chamas can pass the information. The youth can be able to pass the information to all other youth that they relate with. Translating the climate information to local languages is another way of scaling up so that then we are not limiting to the language of English and Kiswahili. It is interpreted in their local language. When we go to the counties, we know that there are different languages that are spoken. And during the co-production, the forecast is translated into that language. We have gone a notch higher to be able to translate it also to Braille. That has happened, and we are hoping that that can be scaled up in other counties so that it can reach even the people living with the various disabilities. In terms of co-production, also scaling it up, engaging more, including the people living with disabilities in co-production. The other aspect is basically ensuring that we train our farmers as champions to pass this information to other farmers. So having climate information champions that, like the lead farmers, the lead users of the forecast, so that then they can be able to scale it up to the other levels of the users. Looking forward to households also, having dialogues at the household level. This goes to the level of the ward level, whereby the county directors of meteorology work with the GAO, that is the government administrators, so that at the lowest level, that is the ward level, this information is reaching our farmers. So as KMD, these are approaches that we are using, ensuring that gender is also mainstreamed in our climate services, ensuring that all sectors of the economy appreciate the weather products and also contribute in co-production to the forecast that meet their needs. So moving forward, Ritika, we are saying that we are responsive to the need of our farmers. We are responsive to the users of the climate information at various levels and in the meeting the needs according to how the populations are really speaking it out to us as we engage at all levels. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Pamela. And again, I am super appreciative of the fact that you've kept time and been quite succinct about all of the points. It's quite interesting. So I do want to wrap up what you were mentioning and saying, but I think in the interest of time, I think I'm going to just jump to a closing round and like a call to action approach from our end as well. As we wrap up, I want to come back to where we started. We spoke about farmers don't need more forecasts, they need better decisions. And I think this theme has emerged in several different conversations and the discussion points that we've had in the past 1 hour or so. So, what today's discussion has made clear is that the opportunity is not just in improving data, but it lies in rethinking how this data is translated, delivered, used, and adopted, to say the least. This is exactly where collaboration between the public, private sector become extremely critical, and in my opinion, I would say imminent. And where models like the PPP approach we are exploring can play a key role. And the WCS project, the Weather Climate Services project, is a great example to that. Um, with this, I'd like to thank all of our experts for your insights and to everyone who took out time and joined this conversation and us today. We're grateful, humbled by your presence and your attentiveness. Thank you so much. And we look forward to continuing this conversation and, more importantly, turning these insights into action. The last thing that I'd like to mention here is that the Sprout and the Mercy Code AgriFin team is running demo days on crop decision trees on Monday and Tuesday. I'm sure most of you would have already received an email, and I would highly encourage you to sign up for that to understand it is, I would say this is like the prequel, and that is the actual movie that is going to happen on Monday and Tuesday to demonstrate to you how these decision trees or this information can convert in real time to actionable information that can be used by our ecosystem here. So again, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Ritika. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Everyone.
you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
January, I'm not sure if